my face. I don't know if
Oh,
that's. I mean, I can always put a window over my face. That's always a possibility. But sometimes you have the ability to.
oh, change.
Um,
Yeah, I've always wondered that whether I can change. We are now live, everybody.
Okie
Welcome to Robert
dokie.
Thorogood.
Hello,
Uh,
everyone. Hello.
hello. We'll just wait for everyone to a few more people to join. But
Oh,
thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Um, I know you must be
not at all.
incredibly busy.
Well, it's quite an exciting time of the year, actually, because we're sort of ramping up to do the third series of the Marlow Murder Club TV show. So
Oh,
this is the
exciting.
stage when scripts are coming in, and we're also reading them. So I had two scripts arrive this afternoon. So I'm quite glad of this chance to talk to you because it gets me out of having to read them.
To
I've
read.
had to reply saying I'll read them tomorrow. So yeah, it's a fun time of year.
Does it take time quite a while? Because I know obviously when you're watching a TV show, it's a set period of time, but if you're reading and critiquing, I imagine it takes a bit longer and working out
Yeah,
what
it's
works
really
on paper.
strange actually, because I obviously I write both novels and I also write television episodes. And it
Hmm.
seems that to come up with a murder mystery when you tell the story, you find a group of people and you kill someone and then you sort of investigate it and then you catch the person at the end. Takes about the same length of time to write a novel as it does to write an episode of television, believe it or not. It's about
Oh,
six
okay.
months because in the world of the book you sort of move slowly through it, writing your words every
Hmm.
day. But in the world of television, you've got to sort of you write it, but then you've got to make it fit the real world. You've got to fit the actors that you can get hold of,
Yeah.
the locations that you can get hold of. So there's a lot of back and forth in the process. So strangely, it takes a very long time to write an episode of television, and you'd have thought you could probably knock it out quite quickly, but no, it takes
Mm.
months and months and months.
Oh, so yeah, well, I imagine it is good to have a break then.
Yeah,
You're
absolutely.
constantly
Particularly,
reading
yeah,
the same thing.
yeah. It can be quite hard actually, and quite often as an executive on the show, you'll try and skip a draft because you don't want to get bored of it, or you never get bored, but you sometimes expect the surprises. Like you can only be
Hmm.
surprised with how the killer kills once, can't you? The
Yeah,
next time you
yeah.
read it, you kind of know what's going on. So you sometimes the writers will do, or I will do on the show, five or six drafts. So
Hmm.
when I'm reading, I maybe will only read every odd number draft, so that I don't get too
Oh,
over
okay.
familiar with it.
Yeah, I imagine that can be a bit of a challenge, being overly
Mm.
familiar with the story and then.
Yeah, and you also you forget that the bits of it that are really good. It can be a real problem. There can be a really exciting chase in it, and the first time the writer hands it in, you go, "Oh, that's brilliant! I love that chase." And then you never say that again, and the poor old writer
Mm.
gets disheartened because they're thinking, "Well, is the chase any good? I can't. They've not mentioned it for 2, 3 weeks, 5
Yeah.
weeks." So you have to also continually say, this is the bit which I really love. No notes on this, because so it's quite a delicate act, trying to keep everyone positive and upbeat and ready for the challenge. Because,
Yeah.
as I say, it
Yeah.
takes months. It's a long old slog, really.
Yeah. I can only imagine. I mean, we all enjoy that it keeps coming. Or that we've
Well,
got.
yes, as do I,
Yeah.
as do I.
Because
It's
yeah,
very exciting.
Death in Paradise is has been going for ages, and then obviously there's the new series as well, and we've got
Yeah,
the Marlow Murder Club too. So that's a lot
yeah.
of
I've killed a lot of people. Is all I can
there's a lot
say.
of death and mayhem.
A lot of mayhem that gets
Yeah.
tidied up by the end of each episode or at the end of each novel. Yeah, no, I love the genre. I've always, everyone who works in murder mysteries is a fan,
Yeah.
and and I've always loved it. So once I started doing it with Death in Paradise, in my go-to, the person who I could continually read is Agatha Christie, like a lot of us. She was so
Yeah.
smart and she did such brilliant murder mysteries, and there's so much humor in them and so much satire and a lot of real nastiness. She wrote some really nasty characters who committed
Yeah.
murder for nasty reasons.
Mm.
Cocaine, incest, it's all there, and we call it cozy crime, but gosh, she really did test the edges of what cozy could be. So,
Mm.
I adore her and I continually read her. And then having started Death in Paradise, the quest is to try and write a story that would be good enough for Agatha Christie. I mean, it's not going to happen, but each time I try and come up with a story, I'm going, how can I improve it? Where's my murder of Roger Ackroyd? Where's my murder on the Orient Express? Again, it won't be achieved. I could think of 30 of her books that are better than anything that I could do, and another 30 that I could pretend I was better than, but I'm not. And she only wrote 80 or 90 books, so that's 2/3 of them that are just genius, absolute genius. But it becomes an obsession trying to come up with a really good murder mystery. Smuggling the killer
Yeah.
past the reader is the game. And it's a parlor
Mhm.
game, and I don't mind when people guess it. I read a lot of murder mysteries, and I'll quite often guess the killer because there's quite often only a limited number of suspects. 5 or 6 people.
Yeah.
So sometimes you kind of know what's going on, but it doesn't stop it being enjoyable. But it's amazing that the high that I'm chasing. That, talking of cocaine, never taken cocaine, I don't know, but the cocaine rush that I'm chasing is that moment when you're reading a murder mystery and you get to the end and you discover who the killer is, and it makes perfect sense, but you never considered them. That's
Mm.
that's the moment. That's what I'm trying to capture in all of my murder mystery stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so we've got a question from Anne, who's on Facebook. In the BPPK, I'm not sure what the BPPK is. You might need to clarify. Um, the description of the characters differs from the actors. Do you feel obliged to change the descriptions?
Oh gosh, you've really found a weak spot instantly. It's tricky. So in the books, I based the main person this would affect would be Judith. So
Hmm.
I was raised by some really fabulous, eccentric older women, my mother, but her aunts, I had 7 great aunts, and wonderful grandmother Betty, who every day would have a glass of whiskey in a cut glass decanter at 6 p.m.
Hmm.
And they were just these super witty, very eccentric, very strong-minded women. And I wanted to take what I loved about all of these great women and put them into a 78-year-old woman's. I named her Judith after my mother's good friend Judith. Judith taught my mother how to do crosswords. My mother taught me how to do crosswords. And Judith's an old family friend. Sadly, she's died now. She was furious that I named Judith after her. She's so modest. She didn't want to. She didn't want to be named in the book. So I sort of came up with this older woman and love writing her. And I wanted her to not apologize for who she was. I didn't want her to be sort of conventionally beautiful. I wanted her to go swimming nude in the river. I wanted all of these things where she would just be full of joie de vivre. When we came to casting the TV show, we went out to a lot of female actors in their 70s. And sadly, we got turned down by absolutely everybody because the sorts of people we wanted in their 70s, they're going, I don't want to lead a TV show. It is very grueling leading a
Mm.
TV show because you're on set the whole time. You're learning lines every night. You're also, I only discovered this when I went on Death in Paradise and saw Ben Miller and Chris Marshall and Ardla Hannon and Ralph Little. Um, you're the captain of the ship. That's too
Mm.
strong, but you're the focus. So you really are the team rally around the lead character, and you're expected to be a leader on the floor, a leader of the other actors, to be a good role model. You set the tone. So it is hard work. And so we struggled to get an actor in their 70s. And so we've cast down. We've got a younger
Mm.
person in Sam Bond, who's only in her early 60s. For me, in answer to the question more specifically, Anne, um, it was about intelligence. I remember talking to Deb, the producer on the show, when we were first casting it. What mattered is not so much the age, because Sam is younger, which means that she can put up with the physical demands of the show more easily. But what mattered is
Mhm.
that I said in any scene, she has to be the most intelligent person in the room. And you have to see that in the twinkle in her eye. She has to have a delight in life, a delight in the cupidity of humans, a joy, an absolute joy. And so Samantha Bond has that. So although she's
Mhm.
younger in the TV show than she is in the books, the essence of Judith, by the time Samantha Bond is 78, she will
Mm,
be Judith, but she's just younger. Um, However, the reason why this is tricky for me is that, of course, in the book, she's still 78, 79, 80 years old. And it is difficult. I'm finding it is not impossible, but it's something I have to be very careful of, that the book version of Judith is an older woman, is
mm,
a stroppier woman, is a, um, yeah, I think stroppy's a good word, actually. It's slightly more grumpy. My great aunts were terrifying women. I mean, anyone who's ever had a great aunt knows they're terrifying. My great aunt Jess wouldn't let me put
yeah.
two vegetables on the plate that were the same color next to each other. So if you put, 'cause I can't think of two vegetables the same color now, all of a sudden, broccoli next to peas, she'd be furious. Why? Nobody knows. No, she never explained. I was like 8 years
Just
old,
that's the way it is.
shaking, just trying to make sure I'm holding my knife and fork correctly and standing up, sitting up straight. So, Samantha Bond will become that person in due course. She has the spirit of that now. And I keep the book separate and the telly show separate. But it's fine. It's all doable, but it is a tension. Very long answer, Anne, sorry. But as I say, you really cut to the nub of the matter.
Oh well, Anne also asked whether writing an hour a Death in Paradise show is different than the Marlow TV show, which is longer.
Yeah, it was part of the reason why again, really good question, Anne, thank you. It was part of the reason why I wanted to leave Death in Paradise and go off and do something new. Writing a murder mystery in 60 minutes is brilliant. However, after doing it for 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, um, it's quite tight. There are very few murder mystery shows. If we think of Midsummer or we think of, I mean, anything, they're never 60 minutes long because
Mm,
you got to, if it's 60 minutes long, we know that the denouement, because I have always felt in a cozy crime that you kind of want to gather up all of the suspects at the end, and the detective should present what really happened, who the killer is, and then the killer just stands there or sits there going, yeah, I'll just wait until I'm arrested. Apparently, this is fine. That's the cozy crime convention. So you've got 7 or 8 minutes of denouement in there. You've got to you've got to meet some people and kill them at the beginning. That's 3 or 4 minutes. Um, and so it doesn't take too long, and certainly within a few seasons of working on the TV show, it has a set rhythm, and you can play with the rhythm. And the people who work on Death in Paradise are brilliant at playing with the rhythm, but the rhythm is a 60-minute rhythm. So when I left, I really wanted to go to a longer form story, because if you look at a Death in Paradise episode, sometimes you'll get a second interview with a witness. Very rarely you'll get a third, but sometimes you'll get a second. But quite often you only actually get really one interview because there just isn't time. And what's interesting is when your understanding of a character changes because new evidence comes to light and someone who you thought was kind turns out to be horrible. Um, and so over that longer 90, a Death in Paradise script is 60 pages and a
mm,
Marlow Murder Club script is 100 pages. And those extra 40 pages that you get, it's sort of two-thirds longer, I think, if my maths works. That allows you to revisit suspects, to actually sort of evolve the story a little bit. So you've got more places that you can go. There's more, you can visit more interesting different places, and you can tell the story with even more of a different rhythm. You
mhm.
can kill someone and then kill someone else very quickly. You can kill someone and then kill someone, 90 pages later, a second body 90 pages later. There's even time for three bodies. So that was sort of part of the appeal for me. What I was looking for was to tell stories over a slightly longer, it's not much, but a slightly longer number of pages.
Yeah. Mm. Um, so Amy asks, what made you choose a cruise as the setting for the Murder on the Marlow Belle?
Well, that's a lovely question. Thanks, Amy. So I collect murders. I know, even as I say it, it sounds preposterous, doesn't it? And probably illegal. But when I say I'm obsessed with Agatha Christie, I'm really obsessed with Agatha Christie, and I really love trying to work out. I mean, it's obvious once you've read her books how she does things, but I try and work out how she does that sleight of hand that she manages to make you think that somebody's innocent when they're guilty. That somebody, quite often with her, that somebody is somebody else. You know, there's so many imposters in all of her stories. You know, a mother not recognizing her daughter. That's always a bit of a surprise when that happens in an Agatha Christie story. But I came up with this idea for a murder, a shooting, that would happen on the river. That was kind of, I thought, this is a trick that I can do, a magic trick. When I left university, I was a magician. I worked at Hamleys and Harrods. Interestingly, James Hall, who's now basically taken over the running of Death in Paradise, was also a magician at Hamleys and Harrods. So this was a sort of a trick, a shooting that I thought of in 2017, but I hadn't got a world to go with it, because you need, it's not just, you know, how you're going to trick the audience into not noticing the killer, but also what world are we going to visit in this book? And I've just been sort of mulling for years now, you know, for 5 years. It's a river-based murder, but I couldn't think of a river-based setting. It's also quite a flamboyant murder, and I couldn't quite gel the two. I thought, well, we could go to the rowing club. We could. There's a sailing club in Marlow. We visit the sailing club in the second series of the Marlow Murder Club TV show. And in the end, I thought, oh, what if it was the Marlow Amateur Dramatic Society? The Marlow in Marlow, we've got the Marlow Players. An amateur dramatic society is full of people who are going to feel thwarted by not being cast in the right show. There's going to be a huge amount of flamboyant, very confident people. This actually fits the sort of murder that I had. So I thought if I put those people on a boat, then I would believe that the murder might happen in that way. Quite a long answer, actually. It wasn't quite as interesting as I thought it would be. But I came up with the idea a long time ago, and I eventually finally found the right group of people to carry it out. And that's a load of amateur dramatic people.
You mentioned that it's set in Marlow, and the other books are set in Marlow. Do you find when you're out and about that you start looking at places and shops and bits that you go,
unfortunately I do, and it's not as fun as I thought it would be, because it sort of means that when I'm out on a dog walk or just walking down the high street, and my brain is sort of noticing things, it's sort of a work. I can find myself in work mode quite quickly, and if I see something or a location, or I'll notice that the round table, like swan upping, right? So here in Marlow, because it's Marlow, once a year we get the royal swan person turns up, beautiful red coat, white cap with a swan feather in it, and they tip up every springtime, and you can go down and watch them count the swans. They used to count them for the Queen, they now count them for the King. Is what they do. They start in wherever they start, Windsor, and they work their way all the way up the Thames. It's a big ceremonial thing. And so I remember going down and seeing that one year and just thinking, this would be a good murder. This is a really, really good murder. And what I really want to do is to enjoy just watching the swan upping, watching this sort of pageant, this very old pageant going back many, many hundreds of years. But I can't help but go, yeah, because you see, with that red coat and that cap, you could put, if someone else was wearing it, you wouldn't notice if the person had changed, or the boat is supposed to be at one point and then it could be at a different point, and my work brain kicks in. So it does. It's brilliant because my research really involves living my life here in Marlow, but it's not so good because it means that I'm constantly feeling that I'm doing research.
Yeah. Or hopefully counting swans.
What a great job. Counting swans and doing research.
Brilliant. So Anne would like to know, she loves the gathering of the suspects at the end. Why nearly always 4 suspects?
Well, funnily enough, it's something from telly, really, which is that we could only afford 4 actors. I mean, it really is that boring. That's not quite true, actually. It is more sophisticated than that. Because I come from a telly background, as I was saying earlier on, you've only got 60 minutes in Death in Paradise. You can't have 6 suspects. You can't, well, sometimes we do actually, but you can't have 7 or 8 because there just isn't time to interview them all. There isn't time to develop leads. There isn't time to develop motives. And the nature of cozy crime tends to be that there's a limited group of people, because it is a parlor game. You're not going into a football team. It's quite often, right, there's a murder in the new series of the Marlow Murder Club, a brand new story. The way we're setting up the series is the first 2 episodes is an adaptation of my book, The Queen of Poisons. And then the next 2 is an original story, and the next 2 is an original story. We go to like a big country house, and then we do a spooky murder in a spooky setting. Now, truthfully, anyone could have walked through the woods, walked into that house and committed that murder. But because it's cozy crime, because it's a murder mystery show, you sort of say, well, there was no one in the woods and there were no footprints in the thing. And then suddenly you're going, oh, it's only 6 people, because it is, or 4 people, because it is a parlor game. And that the joy is to have a small number of suspects. It's a cards trick, isn't it? You're shown 4 cards, and the game is, can you guess which card is the Joker or the killer? So that's why it tends to be a small number. In my first ever episode of Death in Paradise, I was particularly, because I'm a lunatic and I do try and do murder mysteries. I'm sort of obsessed with the genre. In the very first episode, there are only 2 suspects. I wanted to get it right down to the bare minimum, and I'm not going to say it's a spoiler now because it's been 14 years since that episode aired. I only show the audience 2 suspects, and the killer isn't either of them. So that's the game. That's the magic trick. So, in many respects, you want as few suspects as possible. So as long as the killer turns out not to be one of them. So that's kind of why it's so limited.
I mean, there are quite a few in Murder on the Marlow Belle, and I haven't read the ending yet because I'm terrible at spoilers. And I didn't want to do it here for those who haven't finished the book. But
how funny!
I have so far thought it's various different people at different points.
Because the thing is, everyone's got secrets, don't they? In real life, everyone's got secrets, but you don't find out what they are because they're not involved in a murder mystery. I remember my wife is a radio presenter now. She presents on Classic FM. But when she started out in the industry, she worked on a TV show where they followed detectives around, police officers around. And there was one in particular, a Brummie detective, who said to her, here's my card. One day you're going to need a police officer. And she went, no, I won't. I'll be fine. He went, no, believe me, one day everyone needs a detective. And you sort of go, oh gosh, so far she's not had any reason to call Kurt. I'm sure he's retired now. But, if you're not investigated by the police, your secrets stay secret. But then as soon as you're involved in a murder mystery, the secrets come out. And as soon as the secrets come out, then you sort of go, well, maybe you could be the killer. And that's the joy. That's the frisson, isn't it? Saying, all of these people might have had a reason to commit murder. Even though it's very unlikely. And I certainly don't believe that amateur dramatic societies are actually full of murderers, because that would be slanderous, libelous, and everything else as well.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, they're certainly full of lots of different characters. So I read somewhere that you were in Footlights?
Yeah, when I was at university, I did comedy. That's what I did. And I really enjoyed it. And actually, it was quite good training, in the sense that a comedy sketch tends to be a page aside, as it were, and a little bit. It's not much more than that. You very rarely have comedy sketches that are 2 pages long. And actually, writing television, you very rarely have scenes that are 2 pages long. So I was sort of backhandedly fortunate in that by trying to tell these stories, comedy sketch, you have you walk into a doctor's surgery or whatever, and then you have the beginning to the sketch, and then the middle bit of the sketch, and the end of the sketch. That's kind of how scenes are constructed in television shows. So it was quite, it felt like quite a good training for trying to put together longer form stories. But when I got out into the real world, I found out that I wasn't actually that funny. So my friends who were funnier than me went off and sort of wrote on TV shows and actually had their own TV shows, and some of them have subsequently won BAFTAs, and one of them's even won an Oscar. Actually, a few of them have won Oscars, irritatingly. I just wasn't funny enough to do that. But then I discovered drama, and in the world of drama, I sort of am funny enough. So the sort of, if you get out to the world of comedy commissioning and go to the world of drama, they'd say, oh, your scripts are really funny. So that's sort of how I ended up sort of doing murder mysteries because one, I absolutely love them, but it's also it's quite a fun script, isn't it? They're quite joyous to read or to watch on the telly. I certainly know I love watching them, and they should always be a bit funny. You know, Poirot,
Yeah.
who's my sort of favourite detective, is preposterous. He's ludicrous. He's a very, very silly man. And Hastings laughs at him, and Miss Lemon laughs at him. You know, everyone laughs at. I mean, the joke, of course, is that he's a brilliant man as well. But he knows he's silly, and yet he's so captivating. And although, funny enough, I met David Suchet earlier this week, last night, in fact, at a screening of a thing that he was in. And by complete coincidence, I was talking to somebody else, and he knew them, and he came over. So I was able to say thank you, David, for giving us Poirot. He is just the greatest Poirot there's ever been, you know,
Oh, I
to
agree.
actually have met
Absolutely.
him. I
Yeah.
have a soft spot for Peter Ustinov because he was so funny, and those big
Mm.
70s films are so gloriously sunny and fun. But actually, you know, to do a real interpretation of Poirot, I thought he was the best, I think.
Yes. Everyone knows I love Hugh Fraser as Captain Hastings. So I've
Oh, and
mentioned
Hugh
it many times.
Fraser.
Many
Yes,
times.
yes, yes. He's so good. The sidekick role is so important, isn't it? Um, because it's they're the audience point of view so often. You know, I had this when I came up with Death in Paradise. Uh, I set it with Richard Poole, who's basically a neurotic like me, sort of neurotic, middle class, sort of overeducated, and sort of obsessed and OCD and bit spectrumy. If we're entirely honest, I didn't really know those. I didn't know that word back in 2008 when I came up with it. But he's an idiot. He's a brilliant idiot. And then also in the police station, I wanted kind of the antithesis of that. So I created Camille, who's sort of French and spontaneous and fun and won't follow rules. And then there's also Dwayne, because we needed kind of a clown, somebody who would be great at their job in lots of ways, but would never follow any rules either, just like Camille. I thought at the end, I came up with these three characters. I thought they'll be really fun. They'll interact really well. And I went, no one's going to be capable of solving a crime. So I came up with, you know, the Hastings figure, in the TV show Fidel, because I thought we need somebody who's diligent, who's going to ask the right questions, but everyone else is going to go off on wild flights of fancy one way or another. So yeah, you do need someone sensible, you know, to ground the story, to ask sometimes the boring questions, the questions that the audience are thinking, so that the detective can go, no, that's preposterous. Why would you think that, Hastings? And then you're reading the book and you go, oh, that's what I was thinking. Oh God, am I really foolish? But yeah, I loved Hugh Fraser. He was wonderful.
It was brilliant. We've got some love for David Suchet from Catherine there on Facebook.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with Mr.
Brilliant. It's
Suchet.
brilliant. So talking of the character that's kind of the sensible one, would that be Tanika?
Yes, very much so. Yeah. And also, you know, one of the challenges, it's not a problem, one of the challenges of doing amateur sleuths is that we all know in truth, you know, my stories happen, as do most murder mysteries, in quite a heightened world. We know that killers quite often don't actually kill like that. They wouldn't do it like that. And the police wouldn't really solve it like that. But it's still, I get a bit frustrated when the amateur sleuths are trying to solve a crime and the police are off elsewhere with forensics and ballistics and DNA. And you sort of go, well, if only the amateurs had a bit of access to that, then that would be a slightly more authentic story. So I wanted them to have access to the police. And I'd read, because I'm sort of constantly trying to collect stories, that this is some years ago now, that Liverpool police force, whatever they're called, but the police force up in Liverpool, hire civilians to help them solve murders. In truth, they tend to be retired police officers, but they're still civilians. And I'd had this idea for some time that I was thinking, hang on, civilians are allowed to work on a murder. I mean, that's extraordinary if that's the case. But I presume the police are so defunded over the years or so stretched or whatever reason, they need whatever help they can get. And that was my in. I thought, right, so we can have my great aunts, my grandma, we can have Bex, the sort of the perfect housewife who's terrified, and we can have Susie, who's this amazing single mum. We can have these three amateur sleuths solving crime, but we can actually put them in the police station as civilian advisors. In the books, to go back to the very, very first question, there's a great attention about their status within the investigation, because there's reasons. And in fact, I'm writing the fifth book at the moment, and that very much explodes in the fifth book. No spoilers here. So in the books, Tanika is more reluctant to let them in, but Tanika is broadly very sensible. I've sort of based her on my wife, that kind of sandwich generation who my wife has got. Her brother's in a care home because he's got Downs, and her dad is in a care home because he's got dementia, and she has to sort of run the family and look after the kids and hold down a job, and it's just, she has to work so very, very hard to fulfill all of her commitments, and they seem to fall more on her, for example, than they do perhaps on her brother. It seems to be society is saying to daughters that more is expected of them than sons, which is extraordinary and frustrating. As somebody watching it from the sideline, I've got two brothers, so we're all going to be equally hopeless together when eventually our parents get decrepit. And so Tanika is very sensible because she's very practical. She's still, there's sides to her still, but she loves working with the women, but she finds them deeply frustrating because they will not do as they're told.
Yeah, I've noticed that. But I also love how they are also very different. They do have different life experiences. They're intergenerational, and they've got a lovely bond.
Yeah, I did think of
to...
I mean, it's sort of, if I say I thought about it being intergenerational, it sort of sounds like I was sort of cynically trying to create a group of people, but actually what I was trying to do was to find reasons for them to disagree with each other and reasons for them to agree with each other. And so you're looking for people who have come from different parts of the world, have different life experiences, and so you go, well, different ages, different. So I mean, effectively, Judith is sort of super posh in the sense that she lives in an arts and crafts mansion and is independently wealthy. She doesn't need anyone to sort of validate any element of her life. She's entirely independent. And Bex is super middle class, and Susie's basically sort of working class in that she's having to earn every single penny that she does. She's a single mum. She has to do it all on her own. She gets absolutely no help, no support. And so you've got sort of a class difference, you've got an age difference. And what I found really funny, and perhaps I might have seen this coming, but it was sort of delightful because your characters talk to you. This is the weird thing. After a spell, they talk to you. Is that Judith and Susie so often gang up on Bex simply because Judith has got so much that she can't lose anything because her status is, she defines her own status and she's happy with it. And Susie's got so little to lose that she doesn't care either. Of course, Bex has got just the right amount to lose that she's worried the whole time about what people think, what Farrenball paint she has to use, what clothes she has to wear, there was, when I first moved to Marlow, all of the women in not all of the women, but down the high street, you'd notice a lot of the women wearing Ugg boots. Now, we've lived here so long that Ugg boots then became unfashionable. Suddenly they stopped wearing Ugg boots, and now they come back. And I don't know why. We're like, who gets the memo? How does this work? So that's Bex. So she's in the middle. But so, yeah, you're trying to find differences. And that was also why I wanted the three of them. Tanika's the fourth. But basically, the three of them solve crime, because when there's three, then two people will agree and the third one will disagree. And again, that sort of tension is too strong a word because it's hopefully a fun read, and it's supposed to just be a romp, really. But that changing alliances, that sense of betrayal within a group when there's three of you, we all know that's it's quite a fun dynamic. So that's sort of what I was thinking of, just because when you start a story and you don't know your characters, you're going, what would be fun? Like, how can this be sort of joyous? And that's what I came up with. And now, this many books in, and the TV show's up and running, it feels like they've always been there. It was sort of strange, but there was, for that first book in particular, I was going, oh, who are they? I always knew who Judith. Weirdly, I always knew who Judith was, but the other characters less so.
Yeah, well, I think it works really well. Anne would like to know: are you disciplined with your writing, and how long for a book?
I'm super disciplined with my writing because I was very unsuccessful for many, many years. Throughout my 20s, as I said, I left university, discovered I wasn't funny enough to work in comedy. It took me a long time to sort of find my feet in drama. And I got Death in Paradise off the ground when I was 37. So that's a long time of, working as a temporary secretary, as office angels in London, working as a script reader for Miramax and working title, and you got paid nothing to do that. You read a script, they'd send you a script, and you get 35 quid to read it and then write a report. So you're basically sparing the executive the effort of reading the script. You do a synopsis of it, and then you sort of analyze it. So you can say, this could be good or bad or whatever. And generally, it was just to help them reduce the number of scripts they had to read. So by the time I got a TV show off the ground, I had felt I was so desperate that I just, have always worked very, very hard. And you just have to, I don't know a screenwriter or a novelist. Simon Brett, who's lovely, I think he's reached a stage in his career where he said to me, we were on a book panel a while back. He works in the morning. I mean, I'd argue that's possibly a full day's work. It's quite taxing writing. Then he'll go out for lunch, and then he'll have a doze, and then he'll have dinner and watch the telly. And that's his working day. Now, that is an aspiration. If I could get to that, that sounds really, really lovely. He also, joking aside, says it's because he needs to be in life. He needs to go out and about. He needs to go and sit in cafes and listen to people. He's a magpie. He wants to steal. Like all of us writers, wants to steal what he can from the real world. So yeah, I get up very early every day. I will often be at work at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. and then I'll work for as long as I can until I sort of get tired. In the afternoon, quite often I'll edit because it's a different brain. Creating is actually creating grand, isn't it? But writing from scratch is very challenging because you need a lot of energy to get over the doubt, the self-doubt, that sense of, oh God, this is rubbish. That you've got that voice in your head saying, oh, this is terrible, terrible. And I find that easier to do in the morning. So I work very hard in the morning on writing, and then in the afternoon I might edit what I've written that morning. And then, at the end of the day, I don't mean that metaphorically, I mean that literally at the end of the day, you might have written 300 words, 400 words, and then you go, but I've got to write 80,000 words. It's very, very daunting. Anyone who's written anything and gets to the end and puts, the end is just a hero as far as I'm concerned. It's super, super daunting. It's why telly can be so much fun. Because telly's a gang show. You go to a room and you pitch an idea and people pitch ideas back, and there's a collective responsibility. The downside of telly, as I said earlier, is that you're limited to the number of casts because of budgets. You're limited to the geography of the place, what the weather is like. Sometimes you'll write a scene and then it just rains that day and you can't film it. So you then have to scramble around to try and put the information in that scene in other scenes that have yet to be filmed because, the rain spoiled the day. But whereas in a book, you have total freedom. So that's lovely, the total freedom, but the dauntingness of 80,000 words, when you're only going at, 500-600 words a day, if you're lucky. I mean, it takes months and months to write. And it's a real leap of faith. You have to really believe you can get to the end. I've done it enough now that I do believe I can, but it's still, every time I go, what if this is the time I can't finish it? It's horrible.
How do you keep track of everything if you at the end of the day you've kind of had that such a small gain in some days?
Yeah,
How do you
such a
keep it
small gain.
all?
It's very hard, and rewriting really is the answer, because particularly with a murder mystery, I do quite detailed, not quite, I do super detailed plans before I start writing. So I know the order of the suspects, I know the clues that are going to lead to the suspects, I know when the clues are placed, I know each scene in effect. I've written out a very long, it's normally about 40 pages in Word, a very long detailed treatment, because I'm so desperately trying to create something that is meticulous and correctly plotted, and so that the surprises land at the right time, and that the flow, the momentum, runs all the way through, because you can write huge chunks of a novel and discover that it's wrong, and then you have to throw it away. And that is very time consuming and demoralizing, really, really demoralizing. So I try and do all of my failed versions of the story in this 40-page document, and I don't start writing the novel until I can read it from start to end and feel, yeah, there's a flow there, there's a shape that I think could be fun if I did it as a novel. So by the time I'm actually writing the novel, each scene is kind of already written in my head, so I kind of know what I have to do. You still find surprises because, as I say, the characters talk to you, and you know, you spend thousands of hours writing a novel. So quite often there'll be some little quirk of the story or some character trait that you hadn't quite worked out, or that you didn't realize was going to impact on the story. And then suddenly you go, this character would do this.
Mhm.
And then it slightly changes it. So that can be really fun, dangerous and exciting and scary, but fun when you realize through the writing that your treatment was too thin, but now you know the characters better. The story goes off slightly differently, but that's kind of how I approach it. It's to be very, very meticulous. There are two types of murder mystery writers. There's the planners and the pantsers, as they're called, which are the people who fly by the seat of their pants. And I look at the people, Janice Hallett, who I adore her, no, she's a lovely person, but I love her novels. I think she's redefining murder mysteries. Her and Anthony Horowitz both. They're the two most interesting people working in murder mysteries at the moment, I think. She's a pantser. I think she knows roughly what her ending is going to be, but she has, think of The Appeal, which is one of the best murder mysteries I've ever read. How did you do that? Just writing it, not knowing what was going to happen next. I mean, it's miraculous, but yeah, I'm slightly spectrumy, so I kind of need to know everything before I start. I'm much less
Yeah.
fun than she is.
I think also when you've got quite a few characters and you're trying to work out where they were at what point and could they have
Oh,
done it, and to just do that kind of a free flowing from your mind must be.
you're absolutely right. And actually, again, murder mysteries are really meticulous. They're often to do with alibis, who was where, when. It is. I've got better at it, but the first 4 or 5 times I wrote a murder mystery novel, there would come a point in retrospect, I could see there came a point towards the end of that first draft where I realized there was a fundamental flaw in it. That someone who I believed should have been somewhere. I did a locked room mystery I started out by writing Death in Paradise novels because I really wanted to write murder mystery novels, but I didn't have a setting. And I thought, well, I've got the Death in Paradise. When you write a TV show, when you create a TV show, you keep the rights to write a novel, right? No one would use them. You'd be mad to use them. You're making a TV show. Why would you write the novel? But I knew I had the rights to write a novel. I thought, I want to write a novel because that's what Agatha Christie did. So I wrote some Death in Paradise novels, standalone, with Richard Poole, sort of set between series 1 and series 2. Couldn't set it after series 2 because he dies. But in between series 1 and series 2, really enjoyed it. I'd learned my craft, and when I felt more confident, then I did the Marlow Murder Club. But in one of those books, Death Knocks Twice, I got to the end of that first draft and realized that the murder was wrong. It was impossible. And it had taken me 4 months to get to that stage. And there was just a little quirk. It was to do with a window or a window catch or something. So I can't remember exactly. I've got PTSD. But it was impossible. And I had to, and there's a moment your stomach falls. It's like suddenly hearing that someone has died. That's what it's like. Obviously, it's not that analogous, but it feels like that feeling of, oh my God, it's none of this works. And I luckily very carefully thought about it and tried not to panic and found a way around it. But you're always worried, even when you plan as carefully as I do, that you're going to get at some point in the story, there'll be some illogical moment or a logical anything that will fundamentally just pull down the house of cards, because it's a house of cards. It's a nonsense. It's a game, isn't it? So you can't fall back on the veracity, the truthfulness of the characters, because the characters are sort of ciphers for the murder mystery. As I say, you're trying to smuggle killers past readers and have fun along the way. So without the meticulousness, if that falls apart, you're left with nothing.
You start all over again.
You have to start all over again, and that's my greatest fear. I haven't had to do it yet, but I meet writers all the time who've had to write a whole first draft and then throw it away and start again because there was not a mistake, but there was just a fundamental incorrectness in the storytelling, and then they have to go again. But that gives me pause when I think about that.
I really enjoyed the Death in Paradise novels.
Oh, have you read them?
Yes,
Very few people have. It's kind of you to say. I enjoyed writing them. It was lovely being. One of the reasons why I stopped actually was because I discovered that doing telly is very easy to do research because they just point a camera at a palm tree and you've got the Caribbean. And I
Mhm.
found with the books that as much as I loved writing them, and I love Richard Poole, is my favourite detective I've ever created or written. Um, it after I think I did 4 of them. In that 4th novel, I felt I was struggling to capture the Caribbean at all because it's hard to go out to the Caribbean, and I sort
Mhm.
of told the stories, the Caribbean stories that were obvious to me. Not obvious, but as in, they were the ones I most immediately was able to grab onto.
Yeah.
And the settings and the parrots and actually there are no parrots in Guadeloupe where we film it. And that was partly why I wanted to then go on to the Marlow Murder Club and set something back in the UK, which I could. It's a bigger world. I can understand more of that world because I'm from the UK. I felt it
Mhm.
was getting to be a bit of a reach, but I loved writing those books. I really, um,
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
were
I
really
enjoyed them.
fun for
Yeah.
me. Thank you.
I think also because obviously you know who the actors who were cast in the TV show, so
Yeah,
you're imagining them as you're reading them.
yeah, 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 yeah.
I've I've enjoyed the kind of more traditional route with Marlow Murder Club in that I'm building a picture of them independently of the TV
Yes,
show.
yeah.
But yeah, but they're all great. Anne would like to know, who do you read when you're not writing?
Um, well, I go through phases actually, interestingly, depending on my sort of mental health. At the moment, I feel really chipper, so I'm
Mm.
reading lots and lots of murder mysteries. So there's just who am I actually reading? Tom Hindle, I'm reading at the moment, who's written Death in the Arctic, which is very good. He's written 4 books, and I'm working my way through those. A proper murder mystery, set number of suspects, uh, and a killer that you weren't expecting. As I say, Janice Hannett, Anthony Horowitz, um, Stuart Turton. I mean, it's quite. Oh, Richard Osman, the person who
Yeah,
revitalized the whole genre. I mean, we've always been writing this stuff and we've always been reading this stuff, but it wasn't in any way fashionable and it wasn't selling huge numbers. I think Anthony Horowitz has always sold huge numbers because he's sort of one of a kind genius.
yeah,
But for the rest of us, we've all been having a nice time in our little cozy world of cozy crime. Then Richard Osman comes along and suddenly the genre becomes hot. Um, at which no one was more surprised than literally everyone who works in the genre. So we all tip our hats to him, but because of him, there's been so much interest in the genre and so much innovation in the genre. The Seven Deaths of Evelyn or Evelyn Hardcastle, which is the most extraordinary murder mystery I've ever
mm,
read, because I don't know if you know, but it's written in the first person, starting off with you. I think are you the victim? I can't remember, but in that first chapter, basically. Each chapter, you jump from being suspect to suspect to suspect. It's a meta work of genius because you see the murder happen from one point of view, but you might notice during the course of the day, it's set in a country house, that 2 people are whispering over in the corner of the library, let's say. But then in the next chapter, you are one of the people. It's all written in the first person. No, second person, isn't it? You are
mm,
doing this. You're one of the people who is doing the whispering. And so you sort of play, you're like an actor playing
yeah,
each character in the murder mystery. And I could not believe how clever and brilliant it was. So I think there's so much. Janice Hallett as well, who writes her novels. They're epistolary, aren't they? Should you?
mm,
It's not the Examiner, isn't it? It's mostly just
mm,
WhatsApps between characters, and she's able to convey emotion and character and description. One of the characters in that. It just leaps. She's amazing at doing weak female characters. She really is very good, very funny. You're going,
yeah,
well, why am I finding this funny? But she's playing with the form, and she's absolutely brilliant at it. So I think it's become a very, very rich and exciting world where you can, Ruth Ware. I mean, just like the list goes on and on and on and on of current writers, people who are writing now and producing really interesting, good work. So yeah, lots of murder
yeah,
mysteries is the answer to the question. Because I'm well.
yeah, and
At other times when I'm feeling slightly more run down, I'll read anything that's. I've really enjoyed the Fourth Wing series. I must confess, I had to read Onyx Storm very, very quickly, to catch up with what Violet Sorrengale is doing. So I will go off and read something that's the antithesis of murder mysteries as an antidote sometimes. But
Yeah, I think sometimes you have to kind of break away and read
exactly,
something a bit different.
yeah.
Anne says she loved Judith's backstory in Egypt, digging for relics,
Uh-huh.
and her room full of papers. Yes, I
Yes.
agree.
Well, funny if the Roomful of Papers is based on Judith, my mother's good friend or family friend Judith. He was an incredible hoarder. Sadly, I mean, it's why she was very private. I mean, it's not appropriate for you to share in a public forum, but she did hoard enormously. And when she died, she left her house to her daughter Nicola, and Nicola is still working through all of the papers that she had kept throughout her lifetime. And you know, the books were published 4-ish, 5-ish years. Oh gosh,
Yeah,
maybe 5 years ago. And Nicola is still working through because of the amount of stuff that's there.
yeah,
So yes, a lot of Judith is just basically stolen, as I said earlier. You know, it's a magpie, but not stolen. I loved Judith, you know, and I loved her intelligence, and she was just a brilliant woman, and very kind, and so deserving of being the hero of a murder mystery story. So
yeah.
that's why
A
she's the hero of a murder
homage.
mystery. Exactly.
Amy would like to know, do you have any choice over the narrators for the audiobooks? So for those who don't know, Murder on the Marlow Belle was read by Nicolette Mackenzie,
Yes.
who's does a brilliant job of kind of embodying how I imagine Judith would sound,
Yeah, no,
and
she
all
is
the
absolutely
characters.
brilliant. I met her. I was
Oh,
very excited. I
fantastic!
got to meet her, and actually, so this is for the one that's just come out, Murder on the Marlow Belle. So the audiobook of that, there's a little interview. She and I have a chat at the end. So I went down to the studio and met her. And when I write, I've said this, I think, before when we were talking at the Christmas event. When I write my books, I do read them to be written out loud. It's a massive part of I think partly because I come from a sort of a comedy performing background. I sort of think how a book sounds is really important. So when they turned them into audiobooks, I was really invested in trying to make sure that they got the right person. But actually,
Hmm.
they said, "Here's Nicolette. We think she'd be really good." And then I listened to some of her work. I went, "Oh my god, she's absolutely brilliant." And I'm very lucky that she's the person who interprets the books because she does a brilliant job. And I now sort of write for her, which sounds impossible, but if you think about it, in a novel, if you've got it's quite technically quite challenging sometimes to, if there are three people talking, you know, it's like if Judith speaks and then Susie speaks, then the next person who speaks, you don't say Judith said, because
Hmm.
Judith was the previous speaker, so you just say, you know, you just have the speech. So I'm always thinking, how can I help Nicolette know who is speaking at any given time? And I'll change the sentence structure so that when she reads it, she knows exactly who is speaking. And I'm sort of, if it's not that she's the audience is sort of me, I'm writing it for me, but I'm absolutely trying to make it a readable text, because for me it's so important that it's fun when read out loud, and I'm so lucky that she's the person who reads it. And you know, and the book does well in audio format, and it makes me really happy. I don't know why it matters to me so much, but it really does, that it's when spoken, it's enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of half the book in paperback and half it in audio so far. And sometimes I kind of skip back and kind of re-listen or reread parts that I've done in the other format,
Interesting.
and it's and I think she does an amazing job of bringing them all to life. In
Yeah, absolutely. I'm
um,
frustratingly, I can't listen to audiobooks because I drift off. I can't concentrate. And I discovered that
yeah,
that I wasn't listening. I can only concentrate with the page in front of me, which is so upsetting because it would be so revelatory to be able to just take an audiobook and go on a walk or on a car journey.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I find I don't listen. So my brain won't let me listen to audiobooks, frustrating. As much as I love love them and think it's really important, I can't listen to them.
Just keep trying. You'll get there.
Well, I don't know. I
No.
don't know.
Um, So we've got 5 minutes left. Anybody, if you have any other questions, but Anne would like to know. Thank you so much for answering my questions. As a member of the Charles Dickens Fellowship, your novels are so different from his set from his set in Victorian England.
Yeah.
So
They
yeah,
absolutely
I've read.
are. Yeah, but don't compare anyone to Charles Dickens. I think don't compare anyone to Charles Dickens or Jane Austen or Agatha Christie. There we are.
Yes, yeah, I think so. It is hard to compare, although similarities, I suppose.
Charles Dickens. Oh
Sort
gosh, well,
of.
the reason why you can't compare me to Charles. Well, there's so many reasons why. The thing which blows me away with Charles Dickens is his character descriptions. The way he can sum up a character in just a paragraph, and you feel that you've known this person your whole life, and it reminds you of Ezra, who lives in the village when you were growing up. And you go, how is he doing? How's he reaching over 100 years? 2 centuries, isn't it? 19th century to the
Yeah.
21st. Reaching all of this distance and describing someone I've always known, and that skill is I don't know anyone else who comes close to that. And I find reading his books actually a bit overwhelming, if I'm honest,
Mm,
because they are so
yeah.
brilliant. You know,
Yeah.
it's sort of I almost feel crushed by. But they're also big books. Yeah, they're big books.
Physically crushed by them as well.
Yeah, physically crushed. Yeah.
Um, so Murder on the Marlow Belle is the 4th book in the series.
Yes.
But you can read it without having read the previous. How
Yes.
do
I
you kind
always
of meet?
Yeah, funnily enough, I always try. There are no spoilers in any of the books about what had happened before. Sometimes I will glancingly mention stuff, but not in a way that would. I'm always very careful to make sure that were you to read the books in the order 4, 3, 2, and 1, you'd still enjoy it pretty much as if you read them 1, 2, 3, and 4. Because I get frustrated in long-running series. Not frustrated. I just prefer it in a long-running series when there isn't so much baggage and hinterland that you need to know, because you should be able to. It's a light-hearted murder mystery. You should be able to pick it up without any knowledge of the characters, and then just dive in and have fun. And then, if you like it, go back and read the others. I mean, what's the order of the Poirot books? I couldn't tell you. Actually, what is the order of? Is it Why Didn't They Ask Evans? What's the first one he appears in? Anyway, I don't know, because I read them in any old order. And so that's sort of what I was thinking, just the 5th book, funnily enough, does follow on directly after the 4th book. And it's a bit harder. It's still going to be possible to read it without reference to the 4th book, but it does deal with Judith's past. Her past comes
Oh,
back to haunt
exciting.
her.
I think
As you'll discover, I'm afraid, at the end of book 4, if you get to the end after the denouement, there's a little sting in the tail.
Yes, I have read that there's a bit of a cliffhanger. Is it a cliffhanger is the right word?
Yep.
Which will
Sorry
be
about that.
exciting.
I
No,
thought it'd be
I think
fun.
that's
I
good.
thought, yeah, I get quite excited. It's very frustrating when the book hasn't been published, but I love it when you discover a series and the end of the book there's a cliffhanger and you can just buy the next book. So I can go straight in. I can continue. It's the best thing. So yeah, I ended book 4 on a cliffhanger. Sorry about. I do wrap up the story of book 4. Basically, book 5 starts at the end of book 4. If you see what I mean.
Oh, excellent. Well, I like that too. It's nice to have something to look forward to.
Yeah.
That's
We'll just have to wait until next January. It's only 11 months to go, folks.
It's not too long.
Not too long.
Fly by. Rosa would like to know, will you write any more Death in Paradise novels in the future, because they love them as well as the show?
Truthfully, probably not. For the reason that I said earlier, stretching it does feel like Pantalaimon in his Dark Materials. The stretching the umbilical cord out to my understanding of the Caribbean. I did find that hard. It's just hard. Funny enough, if I went back out to Guadeloupe and actually had a bit of a think about it, I could get back into the headspace for it, and that would be a way of doing it, actually. But at the moment, I love the idea of moving forward. At the end of book 5, I'm contracted to write 5 books. I hope I'll do some more Marlow Murder Clubs, but I'm not contracted to do any just yet. And I'm really excited at the idea of not knowing what comes next. It's so enjoyable as a writer to not know what you're going to do next. It's such a it's really rewarding to sort of go, I don't know, have a bit of a think. And you quite often, I might well do another Marlow Murder Club. Quite like the idea of going to the Caribbean and coming up with another Death in Paradise story. That'd be quite fun. But also, what's new? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
that really excites me. So we'll see. But there's something else I'm doing next year that I can't quite talk about, which makes it sound really exciting. And it's super exciting. It's quite small. It's quite a small thing that I'm doing next year, but it's super exciting. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to have a think about where I come up smiling later on.
Excellent. So I think we have one more question, and then I think we're probably at the end of our time. But Ansis, do you have another series of different books in mind, or is perhaps this what you're
No, but
sort of
I
thinking?
suppose that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I think there'll always be murder mysteries because I'm just trying to write a good murder mystery. As good a murder mystery as I can. And each time you do it, you get a bit better at different aspects, or you're hoping to get lucky with the right story or whatever. So I'll be intrigued, genuinely intrigued. You do need fallow time. You do need, as a writer, you do need a break. I've been on a Marlow Murder Club feast for some years now with the TV show and the books, and it's hugely enriching, but it's also hugely overwhelming. It's a lot of time I spend with Susie and Bex and Judith, and a bit of fallow time, a chance to have a little bit of a think. I don't know. As I say, that's what excites me. I'm very lucky in that the idea of not knowing what I'm going to do next, actually now at this stage of my career, excites me. When I was 36, not knowing what I was going to do next did not excite me at all.
No.
That was what my father-in-law would call part of the problem, was that I didn't know what I was doing next. But yeah, I wouldn't mind a bit of it. It's not a break even, it's just a chance to think about what could be fun.
Yeah.
All I ever think is like, what would be fun? What would be next? We'll see.
Yeah. Well, definitely for me is reading the end of Marlow Murder, Murder on the Marlow Belle, because
Sorry, there's too many
want to
Marlow
know
murders.
who did it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's been a really, really great interview. Thank you to everyone else who has asked your questions and listened in. If you want to read the book in audio and you'd like to join listening books, there will be some information on the bottom of the screen at some point, or you can Google listening books. And thank you very much, Robert, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lovely chat. It's been a really brilliant way of avoiding doing some work.
Same for me.
I know. Just have a nice cup of tea and chit chat. That'll do fine.
Thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye now.